Hey everybody, Jeff here. Quick PSA for you all. Just want to remind everyone to vote. Whether you mail in your ballot, drop it off at the many locations around town, or go to your polling place 1 week from today on November 3rd, make a plan and stick to it. And not just because of the importance of the presidential race. There are numerous state, local, and city propositions to vote on, and some of us are electing supervisors. Okay. Back to the show.
She said, "Your birth caused me all my suffering." He just came right out. But I was the one who mangled her up inside. So she had a very special kind of connection to me. You know, I was the one who almost killed her.
That was poet and author Alan Kaufman. Welcome to Storied San Francisco. I'm your host, Jeff Hunt. In this podcast, Alan takes us back to France just as World War II was getting underway there. His Jewish mother and grandmother escaped the Nazis and fled to the mountains in Italy. As an adult, Alan had the opportunity to visit the small town where his relatives hid out, which he shares with us in this podcast. His mom eventually made it to the Bronx, where she met Alan's father. He talks about growing up there, from life at home with his mother and her trauma from the Holocaust to New York City schoolyards. In high school, Alan picked up a book that helped inspire him to leave New York and head out west. Here's Alan.
So, let's see. I was born in Manhattan at the French Hospital. My mother it was called the French Hospital. It was on 53rd Street. My mother was a French Jewish Holocaust survivor. My father was a Bronx Jewish street guy, like real street guy.
Okay, born over here, though.
In the Bronx.
Or in the Bronx.
Bronx, New York.
In the U.S.
Oh, yeah. And he was third generation American from Russia.
Okay.
His family came from Russia. My great uncle on his side was Abraham Kahan, who started a newspaper called the Jewish Daily Forward. It was Yiddish,
Yes.
It's a Yiddish newspaper,
Mhm.
and it was the preeminent newspaper of immigrants coming, at the turn of the century from Russia, mainly, and Poland. So he was my great uncle, and Isaac Bashevis Singer wrote for him in the newspaper. The two Singer brothers, IJ and IB Singers. So there's that, but my mother came from a very kind of cultured French Jewish family whose origins were in Poland.
Okay.
But my father was just, fourth grade education, street guy, gambler kind of guy. And there was a lot of criminality on his side of the family.
On the Kaufman side.
On the Kaufman side. Like,
Got
I have
it.
two cousins that died in prison. One was in Sing Sing. One was in Rikers Island. I have a third. One was in for murder. The other was in for attempted murder. They were real gangsters.
Yeah.
And then Jewish gangsters.
Yeah.
And then a third brother who died in his mother's bathtub with a needle in his arm from heroin overdose.
Okay.
So that was my father's family.
Wow.
And I didn't really experience much of my mother's family. They would come. They came like once or twice to visit, but it was always like they were tiptoeing around and then running.
Her
because,
family was still in France, or?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
In Paris and Caracas, Venezuela.
Okay. Did they speak English or?
Well, they spoke French.
Yeah.
My mother spoke flawed English, very flawed English, with a French accent. My father spoke, Bronx English.
Yeah. And so how did they meet your parents?
After my mother was in the Holocaust, and so she was in the Holocaust from 1940 until 1945. She was in hiding in France and then in Italy. She was, arrested when she was 12 years old with my grandmother. All her brothers and her father had gone into hiding in the south of France.
Okay.
But they didn't think that the Nazis were going to take the women and children.
Okay.
Big miscalculation.
Right.
They came and they arrested my grandmother and my mother. And there was a big roundup on July 21st, 1942, of all the French Jews of Polish origin.
So specific. Yeah.
And it was like 20,000 Jews. And my mother was arrested. They came up and they arrested her. And when she got downstairs, my grandmother begged this French gendarme, policeman, that they had no food with them, and could they just get some food in the boulangerie, the bakery across the street. And he understood. He said, go, take your daughter and go buy yourself bread. They got to the boulangerie, and then they ran. They hid in a doorway. They saw Jews, French Jews, on the buses. The buses were pulling out, waving. And of that group, I think almost all of them died at Auschwitz. And it was very, very, like a handful. I think there was 53 survivors of that roundup. So they
I'm sorry, where in France was this?
Paris.
This was in Paris, okay.
Oh, yeah. And you can read up about this. This is all. So they got in touch with I have an uncle, my mother's older brother, who was connected with the French resistance.
Okay.
He smuggled them into the south of France,
Okay.
which is a harrowing account. It's all documented in these letters that my mother left me.
You said your mother was 10 or 12 at the time?
She was 12.
12, okay.
At the time.
So she has full memories of
Oh yeah.
all this.
No, she remembered. She was actually those letters, which are online. My papers and books and all this stuff are collected by the Special Collections Library at the University of Delaware.
Okay.
And they opened up. I told them I have these letters from my mother. They opened up she has her own website.
Oh, wow.
I'll send you a link to that with the letters
do.
and telling her story.
Amazing.
I mean, she never would have imagined in her life, because she died in 1994. She never would have imagined that would happen.
The internet, you mean?
It had to do with the fact that my career became a platform for her life story.
Got it.
Which was a miracle. It was a miracle.
Yeah.
So she would never have imagined that.
Wow.
So that's all there, and you can. I'll send you a link. You can read the letters. You can read about her.
Yeah. Please do.
A harrowing story. I went back. I went to Italy to trace her route, where she ended up, and I met the people from the Italian underground in the mountains. It's a whole story.
Them or their descendants?
I met the son of the woman who was part of the group that hid him.
Wow.
And the place where they were hidden.
I mean, to state the obvious, that must have been crazy emotional.
Well, that's a whole crazy story, too. I'll tell you that one.
Let's hear it. We're here for crazy stories.
Okay, I was in... I kept getting invited to these literary festivals in Austria and Germany.
Mm-hmm.
So there's one called Sprachsalz. It's in Austria, in the Alps.
Mm-hmm.
So I was invited there, and the organizers live in Zurich. So they invited me to come to Zurich after the festival, to stay in Zurich for a week. So I went, I stayed in Zurich for a week. It was wonderful. Saw with James Joyce, hung out and all that.
Yeah.
Then I said, they said, what are you going to do now? I said, because I had other gigs that I had to do in Berlin and in Salzburg and all these different places. I said, I'm going to use the next few days to go to Italy and find where my mother was hiding with the Italian underground. So the wife, Magdalena, she said, the wife of the organizer, she said, well, let's look on the internet and see how would you get there. There was no way to get there.
Okay.
There was the best you could do was to take a train to this distant place and then maybe catch a bus to a city that was a town that was really kind of near it, but not. And then the place itself is like in the mountains.
I'm thinking that's the point, right? Is to have
It's in the mountains.
to hide them somewhere.
It was in the mountains. So, so I was like, oh well, I'll figure it out.
Right.
I'll get there.
Yeah.
And they said, no. She turned to Heinz, her husband, and Elias, who was another organizer. And she said, take him. She ordered her husband to take me there. She said, take him there. So I was like, no, are you serious? Really? I mean, yes, they're going to drive you there from Zurich to this place in the mountains in Italy.
Wow.
I was like, thank you,
Yeah.
While we're driving, they begin to talk about their backgrounds.
Uh-huh.
Elias's father was in the Wehrmacht.
Mm-hmm.
These are Austrians, Germans.
Right.
In the Wehrmacht, and he was in the invasion of Russia. They did bad things.
Yeah.
Heinz, who was driving, his father was in the SS.
Okay. Wow.
And he said outright, my father killed Jews.
Jesus.
They were making amends.
Yeah.
It was an incredible moment. I was like, wait a minute, I'm on my way to the north of Italy in the mountains where my mother was being hidden by the Italian underground, and I'm being driven there by the two sons of Nazis?
Right.
What are the odds? We get to this town in the north. It's a little town, very Christian, very Catholic, very religious, but also they're communists.
Okay.
They're Italian communists.
Okay.
And religious.
And this was in the...
Only in Italy.
Not... When was this? 80s, 90s?
No, this was in 2014.
Oh, okay.
5 years ago.
So Italian Catholic communists.
Italian Catholic communists.
In the mountains.
In the mountains. In this little city. And so we got there, and we're running around asking people, I knew that the name of the family was Malchio. Malchio, that's the family that hit her.
Okay.
So I'm running around and says, do you know Malchio, the family Malchio? Nobody knew, nobody. So anyway, Heinz and Elias went off to buy some food because we were starving. And I wandered into this little tiny tourist office. It was tiny. And it was two elderly Italian ladies sitting there talking. It's like, hi, excuse me, I'm looking for a family called Malchio. And one goes, yes, Sisi, Malchio, yeah. She points into the mountains. She goes, there, Malchio. They live in a place called Sand Ponds.
Okay.
That was the name of the village.
Okay.
And that name is in my mother's letters. It's like, oh my God. So I get Elias and Heinz, and we jump into the car. We're driving into the mountains, and we pass this little spire of a little church in the mountains that my mother mentions in her letters. We get up there. We're driving and driving. The road's getting narrower and narrower. The mountain's getting higher and higher. At one point, we're driving, and I look out over the side. I mean, literally, sheer drop, off the edge. One wrong move, we're finished.
Yeah.
And there's no road. At a certain point, it's just dirt. So we're like, maybe this is a mistake, maybe, because there's no signs, there's nothing. All of a sudden, up ahead, we see a couple of goats. We creep up with the car, more goats, a whole herd of goats. And we see a sign written in rope, this weathered rope, Sand Ponds, on this piece of wood. We turn into this tiny little village, a hamlet.
Yeah.
And there's a lady, an Italian lady, I'll never forget, wearing sneakers at a well, drawing water from a well. So we go up, and I don't speak, none of us spoke Italian. These guys speak German and English, and I speak, So we go up, I just go up, I say, scusa. I said, Malchio. She goes, si. She goes, she brings back the son of the woman who hid my mother.
Wow.
We're friends on Facebook. So Anyway,
through
broken English and
Yeah.
through a little of this and a little of that, and he knew right away. And also very interesting, he was talking about the underground, how they would meet in this place in the village from all of the northern region. They would meet there in this village. It was like the most remote
It's
place.
a good place to hide and
Great
be
place to hide.
secretive.
Not only that, but they weren't Italian originally. He came from a family that were Spanish,
Okay.
from Spain.
Wow.
He said that his family in the 19th century were mercenaries who were fighting against Napoleon.
My goodness.
And what happened was, when Napoleon invaded Spain in the 19th century, he committed all these atrocities. They were fighting against Napoleon. They were Spanish mercenaries
Wow.
fighting against Napoleon. And what happened was Napoleon defeated them, as we know. That's what Goya, his drawings are about. And so they came over the mountains into the north of France, and they settled in Saint Pons.
They went into hiding.
Oh, Damonte. That's the name of the city.
Damonte.
The town.
But
Damonte.
but up in the little village with the goats and the well was
Saint Pons.
Saint Pons. My goodness.
Yes, there's Damonte, and then there's Saint Pons in the mountains.
Okay. How did your mom, and I assume her mother, how did they get out of there?
Out of that town, the village?
Yeah, to get to the... Did they go straight to the U.S.?
Oh, no. That's a whole story. I mean, how did they get into how did they get to Damonte is a whole story. But anyway, what happened was that they well, it's not after the war, but when the Germans retreated from Italy, the Allies moved in. The Allies came to Sicily, and they weren't all the way up there in the north. So the Germans withdrew from that region. When they withdrew, my mother and her mother went south, trying to get to France, and that's how they got to France alive.
Yeah.
Because there were Germans all along the way who were killing people left and right. If they just came across you, they just killed you immediately.
Yeah.
Because they had nothing to lose. They were leaving. They just killed like crazy on the way out of France. So she got to Paris, and I'll show you her document from then. She got to Paris. She was now 17. You can see there's a picture of her on this document they gave her that says she's a Holocaust survivor from the French government, and that she's 17. They stayed in Paris for a little while, and then she wanted to go to the United States, but they wouldn't let anybody in. So she went to Caracas, Venezuela by herself.
Wow.
She was like 19, 18 or 19. And she started a children's clothing factory.
Wow.
By herself. I mean, just a couple of ladies in Venezuela like sewing children's clothing, and then she would sell them to people back in Paris. She started a children's clothing factory.
Were there other French expats there
Very few.
that she knew, or
very, very few.
do you know why specifically she went to Caracas?
Yeah,
or-
because that was the only place you could get to.
Got it.
In other words, there were certain Latin American countries that were letting in expats from Nazi expats, like in,
We know about
the
those.
boys from Brazil,
Chile and Peru and
places like that.
Argentina.
But in
we knew about
Caracas, they
that.
had some Jews.
Okay.
And she was able to connect with them, the Jewish community there, and they gave her a place to live, and then she started to move her hands and feet and to make some machaleben, as they say in Yiddish, make a living.
Yeah.
And it did very well. But her dream, my aunt Beatrice in Paris told me, I said, how did she end up marrying my father? My father was he was devastatingly handsome guy. Like, devastatingly
Was
handsome.
that part of it?
No doubt.
Okay.
No doubt. He was really, my father was
Yeah.
a good-looking guy.
Okay.
And, but, no education, gambling, no purpose in life, nothing. she was very kind of driven person, you know, like get things done, but not him. They met. Her dream, my aunt Beatrice in Paris told me her dream was to marry an American and to give birth to children in America.
Huh.
Free.
Okay.
To be free.
Yeah.
She wanted no more war.
Yeah, sure.
I was like, why didn't she go to Israel? You know, I mean, a lot of Holocaust survivors went to Israel. No war. She wanted no war, no drama. She wanted to live in a quiet place that was, and she didn't trust France or Europe anymore. Mm-hmm. Completely lost. You know, she was arrested by French police and Germans. You know what I mean? She just, you know, and they don't talk about that. Oh, they do now, but for like 25 years, Marcel Ophuls made a film called The Sorrow and the Pity about the French collaboration with the Nazis, and nobody wanted to show that film in America, in France. You couldn't even show that film in France.
Wow. It
was a big scandal, the fact that the French and other European countries collaborated with the Germans to send Jews to the concentration camps.
Right.
Anyway, so...
But your mom had this dream.
Free children.
A very specific, I want to move to the United States, marry an American. And
marry an American, have American children. Free, because to everybody then was like America was it was freedom.
Yes.
That's what she wanted.
We don't mean it didn't cost anything. We mean free.
Free in the sense that nobody's going to put you in a concentration camp because you're Jewish.
And I assume, tell me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming, you know, New York was by and large the place
Jewish
that you went if you're
New York is Jewish city.
Yeah.
She went to New York.
Yeah.
She met my father she had an aunt in the Bronx who knew my father's aunt. Oh. And they made what's called a shidduch, like an arranged meeting. And my father, you know, I mean, really, I heard from my uncle terrible stories about what my father did with my mother, you know. Seduced her, you know, completely. It's like Madame Bovary.
Okay.
Tragic.
Was there anything else that your aunt told you about what it was about your dad, other than he was this lucky American that your mom ended up looking for?
Yeah, he was like innocent. Like he had no... Beatrice, you know, said your father was an innocent man. You know, he didn't fight in World War II. He was too young. Mm-hmm. He knew nothing about Holocaust. You know, nobody at that time spoke about the Holocaust. They didn't even have a term for it. The Holocaust was not a term then.
I assume not that some people didn't know the extent right after.
Well, they knew that there was
something
concentration camps.
Right.
It was in all the newsreels. They did the Nuremberg
trials, yes,
which didn't cover the entirety of that situation. Right. Just the lead people.
Yeah.
And and then meted out whatever justice, so-called, was meted out. But by and large, the entire history of how 6 million Jews were murdered was hidden.
Right.
In fact, even in Israel, there's a book by Tom Segev called The Seventh Million about the Jews who came to Israel and how the Israelis were like ashamed too. They didn't want to, we didn't want to talk about this. Mm-hmm. It was a shameful thing. And I remember when I was growing up, even my father made fun of my mother about it.
Okay.
Even he made fun of it. Nobody understood what it was.
Right.
It was of a magnitude that was incomprehensible.
It still is in a way, but yes.
And the Jews were like, you know what? Let's not talk about it. Everybody don't want to hear about it.
Moving forward, we're moving on.
They didn't want to talk. We have to move on.
Yeah.
But my mother talked about it with me.
Yeah.
There was no one there to talk about it with in the Bronx.
So that's a good segue. Let's. I'm assuming you're born early 50s.
52.
52. Yeah. So. We can skip the early stuff, and if you want to talk about those conversations that your mom had with you, or anything else about your upbringing.
So until I was 5, she didn't mention the Holocaust, and she was very relatively happy. She had my brother and I. It was a very traumatic birth. She was very sick.
Yours or your brother?
Hers. She got very sick. No, my brother and I were like 2 healthy horses. I mean, we were completely.
She got sick having you or your brother?
My brother and I are fraternal twins. We were
Oh,
born the
okay.
same time.
Okay.
She got very sick from that birth, but she was very happy. She was very, very happy to have.
She got her baby, her American baby.
Oh yeah, she like her dream. She got two.
And two for
You
the
know,
price of one.
she was very happy. We lived in projects. We were the only white people on the projects. My father, that's all he could afford.
In the Bronx, you said?
In the
or-
Bronx, the
okay.
Patterson House projects.
Okay.
And all my early childhood friends were African American.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it was normal. It was just
Sure.
completely- And it was normal, actually. It was very
Yeah.
normal. So, but what happened was when she was 5, she got pregnant and lost a little girl at term, 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, she was French, couldn't speak English very well, surrounded by Americans, me and my brother, these two, American kids in the Bronx, and my father, and then his relations, she had no friends.
Right.
Nobody around. And I think she was hoping that little girl would be like her connection, you know what I mean? Like the mom and little daughter, kind of little world of their own, and the child died. And I remember when she went off, before she went off, she was like the happiest, good-natured. When she came back from the loss of that little girl, she was a transformed person.
Yeah.
Like different person.
Wow.
She lost her mind.
And you were 5?
We were 5, my brother and I.
So you remember that?
I remember
that demarcation kind of.
clearly.
Yeah.
I remember when she came back. She didn't come back immediately. She was gone for like a couple of months. She
Okay.
was sick in the hospital. So we were like put in a Jewish home for orphans for like a month.
Wow.
Weird stuff.
Yeah.
Because my father couldn't take care of us. He was off gambling and
He was busy.
he was busy.
Yeah.
So, anyway, but I remember when she came back, we were. She was a different human being.
Yeah.
I remember she had lost her mind in a very real way. I mean, she was crazy.
So that must have affected your time living there from 5.
Well, she became violent.
Okay.
She became violent, and she began talking about the Holocaust. So when I was like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I didn't have any Harry Potter. Hearing about Hitler and the Nazis and killing the Jews and the horrors that she witnessed and the things that she saw and what happened to the Jewish people were my Harry Potter stories. Like I'm 5 years old with my mother, and it was like a ritual. It's like she'd wake me up at like 2 o'clock in the morning, crying and hysterical. A couple of times she tried to commit suicide. She was threatening to jump out the window. Or she would lock herself in the bathroom and collapse to the floor, and I'd hear her on the floor crying and screaming, and I'd be there. I was 5 years old. Mommy, mommy. Rattling the door, come out. And then when she would come out, sometimes she would start to hit me, like for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
And that was terrible. I remember it. Very mild, even now I remember.
Yeah.
I'm 68 and I still remember it in my body.
Right.
And then I would go back to bed, and then she would come back in and get me out of bed again and take me into the bedroom. She had a valise, like a little suitcase, with photographs of people from her family who were killed, or friends who died. And she would take these pictures out and start to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
And then she would talk about the Holocaust, about her experiences. And that was a weird experience because that was a moment of like real bonding with my mother.
Yeah.
She was very nice to me. She would speak to me in this very nice way.
Just you or you and your brother?
My brother wanted
Nothing.
my brother, she didn't even think of talking to my brother, but he couldn't care less.
Interesting.
But I was like a mama's boy. I was like, Mommy, I want to help Mommy.
Yeah.
And she always only hit me. She never hit my brother.
Huh.
I used to say, why me? She's telling me, well, you were older than your brother. I said, but by how much? She goes, I was 4 minutes older than my brother. I was the firstborn. She said, your birth caused me all my suffering. He just came right out. But I was the one who mangled her up inside. So she had a very special kind of connection to me. I was the one who almost killed her.
Right.
Of course, I didn't, understand any of that when I was a kid.
You're 5. Yeah.
I was 5 years old, 6, 7, 8. This was my experience for until around 12, 7 years.
Okay.
And then when I turned 12, strange that 12 age, we moved back to the Bronx because we were traveling around and all this. We came back to the Bronx. We would because of my father and his gambling debts, they would come to collect from break his legs. So we had to leave New York. We would leave. My mother and my brother and I would get on Greyhound buses and travel different crazy places.
Okay.
And then when my father said it's okay to come back, we would come back. So when I turned 12, we moved back to the Bronx, to a neighborhood in the Bronx where we stayed for 6 years.
Was that
until
because
I was 18?
Your dad stopped incurring debts, or
No,
what
he
happened?
started working for the post office. The post office is there's a certain culture there.
Yeah.
And so anyway.
Can we maybe fast forward just
sure.
a little bit, maybe to your teenage years or your early adult years, and then get us to San Francisco.
So my brother and I were these two little chubby boys, mama boys. I mean, completely mama boys, thrown into the Bronx, into the schoolyard of the Bronx. And so my brother, he beat a fast retreat, but I kind of got into the schoolyard mix. Mm-hmm. And I got the crap beat out of me, but I kept coming back. And then when I was 13, I shot up to 6 feet tall.
Okay.
I was falling on my face. I had no balance, but but I got into athletics in the schoolyard.
Okay.
I fell in with a crew of guys who were always getting into trouble, but were into athletics. And by the time I was 15, I was a bad boy, and went to DeWitt Clinton High School when I was 16. That was the 7,200 boys, all boys.
Oh, wow.
It was the biggest all-boys high school in the world, and had the best football team in New York City. I went out for football. I made it. So I made the junior varsity and the varsity, played in the city championship.
Oh, wow. This is late 60s now?
Yeah.
Mid to late 60s?
67, 68, 69.
Yeah. Got it.
And they had a literary magazine, The Magpie. I became the editor of the literary magazine. So I was playing varsity football. I was the editor of the literary magazine. I was living in I was starting to move towards what I wanted.
Right.
And what I could do to get out of the Bronx. I just wanted out of the Bronx. I wanted out of there.
Did you know where you wanted to go yet?
No.
That's what you had to figure out.
No, I was reading, I went into a stationery store on 170th Street in the Bronx one day, and there was they used to have these magazine racks of with paperbacks, books. I pull out this paperback book called On the Road.
Oh, yeah.
Jack Kerouac.
Mm-hmm.
It was because the cover had this guy looking cool, he's hitchhiking, and this beautiful girl, and it's oh wow, what's this? On the Road, and I had some road in my background from all the traveling.
The Greyhound trips.
The Greyhound trips. So I said, what is this? That book just stole my soul.
Okay.
That was my real first.
Would you say it was you by yourself, or did you have friends who were into some of that? It was
nothing.
Just you?
No, all the guys I knew in the Bronx they were all heading towards heroin addiction, crime, and I had one friend who played football. He got out. No, it wasn't them. Nobody was talking about Jack Kerouac in the schoolyard or anything.
Right.
In high school, I had a teacher named Mr. Greenhouse who made me the editor-in-chief. And he mentioned Kerouac. I told him, I'm reading On the Road. He's like, oh, cool, and he told me about Kerouac and all that. But that book changed my life.
Sure.
That book totally changed my life. It gave me the vision of another way. another out, a way out.
Mm-hmm.
A way out that was literary. It didn't require you to be a millionaire, and you could just put on a backpack and just take off.
That was Alan Kaufman. On the next episode of Storied San Francisco, Alan would describe his arrival in the city. Please join us for part 2 this Thursday. Music for Storied San Francisco is by Otis McDonald. Photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. The show is hosted and produced by me. Michelle and I have produced more than 130 episodes over the last 3 years, and you can find them all at our website, storiedsf.com. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, where you can like, comment, and share the stuff we put out. Find the podcast just about everywhere you can listen, including, most recently, BFF.FM's new podcast network. Please subscribe to stay up to date on all the content we publish. We love feedback, so if you have any, our email is storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening. Stay strong, stay safe, and stay healthy.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.FM podcast network. Learn more at podcasts.bff.fm.
BFF.FM, best frequencies forever.